Hello, everyone. We are here with the first ever A Little to the Left live stream. I'm so excited. Today, we're going to be talking about aromanticism and asexuality, which I think are conversations that are often left out of these discussions on the left. So to that end, I've invited my friends here of the show, Jasper and Daniel, to help us have this conversation where we answer questions that I got from all of you on Instagram about being asexual and or aromantic. So thank you two for joining me today. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So I thought, a good and kind of obvious place to start, most of the questions I got were related to how do I know if I'm asexual or aromantic, which is actually really hard to answer for people. But I thought we could start off just talking about sort of our own little journeys to discovering our places on the spectrum and, just the little signs that came up along the way that now we can look back on and say, oh, aha, that was something that was pointing towards this orientation for me. I know for myself, I identify as demisexual. And, that can mean a lot of things to me. It just means that although I do have an interest in sex, it's not super important to me. And it's not something that I really want to participate in before I have established a really deep and meaningful relationship with someone, or at least I feel connected to them in some way and very comfortable. For me, I don't necessarily need to be madly in love with somebody to have sex, but I do need to feel that we like each other, that we've established some kind of rapport, that there's a connection there. I don't experience attraction just on a superficial level. I don't ever look at someone and say, oh, they're hot, I want to sleep with them. That never happens to me, and it was always very confusing to me growing up because obviously a lot of other people do work that way, and I was just like, that's interesting. And then I think for me the most formative and important experience that happened to me that made discovering that I was demisexual really important on my journey was that as I became a feminist in high school, I really internalized this idea of sex positivity, meaning that you had to be promiscuous in order to be a feminist, in order to be sex positive. So in my, early 20s, I had some encounters, and honestly, even into my 30s, I had some casual encounters where I thought, oh, I'm sex positive and I want to have, I want to be a person who has casual sex and who hooks up with people and doesn't care about it. Because I also used to be, really indoctrinated in purity culture and being really concerned about my number. So I was like, this is liberating, right? Just to like sleep with people. But I always found the experiences really, honestly, somewhere on the scale of traumatizing on the bad end up to just feeling very mechanical and not satisfying in any sort of way. And I would always walk away from those experiences feeling kind of empty and feeling really confused. And I would internalize that as a lack on my part, that I wasn't progressive enough, or that I wasn't hadn't done my feminist journey well enough to be someone who could just casually have sex with people. So when I found out that demisexuality was a thing, it really was super empowering for me to finally kind of give myself permission to be like, this is just not something that works for me, and that my journey into, feeling sex positive and feeling feminist and all these other things could mean like just not doing things with my body that I don't want to do. I mean, revolutionary, I know. But it was, I think for some people, they can just kind of honor, what they want and be fine with it. But I think for other people like me, it can be really empowering to have a label and to have that kind of permission to give yourself space to just say, yeah, this doesn't work for me, and I can still be this empowered person without having to do these things with my body that I don't want to do and that just don't work for me. So Jasper, what was your little ace journey?
Well, ever since I can remember, I've always known that I was not interested in relationships. When I was a kid and I would watch romance movies or Disney movies, I was disappointed when the characters got together in the end. I didn't want any of that. nonsense. And I also grew up Catholic, so I was not encouraged to be interested in sex at all. And probably because of that, and because of my sort of internal lack of interest, I never learned about what sex was for a very long time. So I just kind of went along doing my thing. And, in middle school, people started asking me, like, oh, who do you have a crush on or whatever. And I'd just say nobody, and they wouldn't believe me. And so I would occasionally just pick somebody randomly, just come up with something so they'd leave me alone. And at one point, somebody asked me, like, are you gay? And I was like, no, I'm not gay. that's not it. But I didn't really have a word for it. So eventually I made up a word for it. I was like, well, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, those are the options. I don't like them, so I'm asexual. I just made that up myself, and that's what I was, until I learned that other people were using that word, and I was like, awesome, I'm not the only one.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so in the asexual community, I also learned that there was such a thing as aromantic, and I was like, that sounds like me too. So I mean, since then I have had romantic partners, but it's not because I necessarily sought it out. It's just because it sort of happened, and we were friends, and it just sort of evolved that way. And I like the stability and the commitment of that kind of relationship. So I'm willing to sort of do some things that I wouldn't do just for my own sake, in order to be in those kinds of relationships. Yeah, that pretty much covers it.
Okay. And Daniel, what about you?
Well, it's a bit different for me, I guess. I definitely at a younger age had no idea about asexuality or aromanticism or anything like that. And I used to read a lot, and even things, well, romance in novels was something that, I mean, I think I enjoyed that as much as anybody, really. And for a time, I even thought that was something I wanted, until I noticed that in stories about romance, it's only the courting period that they ever show, and then they don't show any of the actual relationships. I didn't know anything about that, really. I guess I put some effort in my later teens into performing the expected allonormative role for some time, although because my friendship group were not so open about that kind of thing, I didn't have to go into any kind of extremes like they do in certain frattier types of friendship groups, I guess. But basically, at the end of my one and only longer romantic-ish relationship, I felt a certain relief, and I thought that I've kind of shown that I can do this now, that I'm, valid and worthy. And so then I just felt like, oh, well, now I don't have to do it anymore, because I showed that I can do it. So now I don't have to bother with that. And it wasn't really until a long time after that, maybe, I don't want to say 10 years, but close, that I saw a talk by David J., who is an asexuality activist. And that talk was actually not so much about asexuality. It was on, in itself, it was about connection to other people. You can have non-sexual connections to other people, or non-romantic connections to other people. And after I saw that, I started researching asexuality a bit, and I realized, oh, okay, that now a lot of things make sense all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oh, go ahead. Are you?
I was just going to end with I called myself gray ace for a while instead of asexual, because it seemed less definitive. But eventually I realized that that's a ridiculous reason to use that label instead, so I stopped.
So I think, to try to address this question of how do I know if I'm asexual or aromantic, how do you two define these terms, either generally or for yourself? And I know for myself, I've actually been questioning if I'm aromantic lately, and we tried to define romance on a different stream, and was told it was not helpful. So no pressure. But yeah, I was just curious how you two sort of define this, because I have found the aromanticism for me in particular has been kind of a really nebulous thing that I've had trouble sort of pinning down. So how do you define it for yourself?
Well, the way the community defines it is a lack of attraction, either romantic or sexual, but obviously people use it in kind of different ways. It can also be a lack of, like, an asexual person may not have a sex drive, and so they just call themselves asexual, or they may be repulsed by sex, and so they call themselves asexual. And same with romance and the aromantic side. So the way that I define romance is I consider it a class of relationship, like a type of relationship, and it's sort of like gender roles. Like when you hear man, you kind of know what that is. Like you can add or subtract things, but you have like a basic starting point. And so that's how I see different types of relationships, romantic, friendship. You can add or subtract things, but there's like kind of an idea of what you're going for there. And so since I don't really have a drive to seek out that kind of relationship, I call myself aromantic.
Makes sense. Daniel, do you have anything to add?
Well, it's tricky because, as far as I'm aware, I've not experienced sexual or romantic attraction. And so I know that the community definition is that you lack those, or you have very low levels of attraction. But if you've not experienced, it's not the easiest thing ever to say that I'm not experiencing this emotion that I haven't experienced. I don't know what it is. It becomes very, very, very vague. So like I think many asexual people for a long time, I kind of feared that a lot of what people do in romantic relationships and in sexual relationships is performative, because they kind of saw it on TV that that's how you act. And because for a while I was doing that myself, just trying to emulate for no good reason. And so when you eventually realize that no, it's actually there's actually some emotion there that I don't feel, that causes people to act this way, that was a little bit shocking, I have to say. But that way it becomes it's kind of just guesswork, really, like more or less qualified guess that they're feeling something that I'm not feeling, and therefore it's reasonable to call myself this or that. But when it comes to specifically romantic relationships, I think of the like the metanormative kind of relationships, if you heard that term, where it's supposed to be like exclusive relationships where you cut other relationships off, or you prioritize one relationship above all other relationships. And I don't feel any kind of desire to have anything like that. That seems kind of weird to me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of been my journey. It's like I don't know if there's a need to label it, but just as I've gotten older, excuse me, I have been very annoyed being in romantic relationships where the person is overly like romantic, if you know what I mean. Like I do like having Jasper, I kind of relate to what you said. Like there, in a lot of ways, there's something beneficial to having that stability and that, you know, kind of structure that I really enjoy. But I've always said, you know, if you're going to give me a gift, give me something practical. Like, you know, there's a lot of just the storybook romance kind of stuff that I just do not enjoy. And I also, Daniel, to what you said, like, I really don't care to prioritize certain relationships over others in that way that we're expected to. And I've always found it like deeply painful when my friends do that, even though I've always known like, oh, well, that's what you're told to do. That's what we're taught you're supposed to do. But yeah, I've always found it really deeply painful when my friendship with someone will change because they've started dating someone. I find it, yeah, it's just, it's never really, I don't want to say that it hasn't made sense, but it's just always been something that has caused me a lot of internal kind of strife. And then I feel like I can't really talk to the other person about it because I feel like you would come across seeming really clingy, or like you're being unrealistic about how things are supposed to work. And so it's been really amazing to have the friends that I have now, because I feel like they are also more on the same page of like really treasuring and valuing and prioritizing their friendships, which has just been revolutionary for me to experience other people actually feeling the same way that I do. So yeah, I haven't, and I've been single now for a long time, and I'm just like perfectly happy. So again, I don't know if it's something that needs to be labeled, but I have been kind of questioning this lately of like, oh, am I aromantic or am I on the spectrum somewhere? Because yeah, I'm open to and would maybe like at some point to find a partner, but it's not really a huge priority for me. And even in the last several relationships I was in, I always made it very clear to those people that like my job is a priority, like my creative work is a priority, my friends are a priority. You will also be a priority, but like you have to understand you're not going to be put way above these other things. Like these all need to have space in my life and pretty equal distribution. And that did cause problems with some people, you know, who just have this idea of like your romantic relationship is supposed to be way above everything else. And those relationships ended pretty quickly because of that. Yeah.
If I can just add one thing
Mm-hmm.
about asexuality specifically, there's also another confounding factor. I'm not sure I want to. Maybe societal gaslighting is too harsh a term. I'm not sure, but there's
I
this
love it.
there's this idea of when it comes to men or man adjacent people, you're kind of told on the one hand that if you say you're asexual, you get told that you haven't met the right person yet. But at the same time, there's this idea that you're supposed to follow your dick around like it's a divining rod, right? And for women,
that's
right?
amazing.
And when it comes to women, instead, a lot of women are told in media and in the culture generally that women don't enjoy sex that much.
Mm-hmm.
They don't
Mm-hmm.
feel that sexual attraction is that strong. So a lot of times it seems like when women say that they're asexual or demisexual, someone will tell them that, oh, that's just how everybody is, right?
Yeah.
And try to invalidate it that way. And of course, if you're trying to figure this out, that can be very confusing, both of those things.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I think it can be I like to talk a lot about how we need to have better consent with men or AMAB people, however classifying them, because of things like that. Like there are plenty of men who are asexual, and yet, like you said, they're seen as they're supposed to be highly sexualized and basically just like down for anything at any time with anyone. And I think there's a lot of trauma that goes into that, because I think for a lot of people, they feel like they can't say no, they can't turn stuff down, or they may have stuff happening to their body without their consent that then is very hard to kind of stop or slow down, because the other person just assumes like, well, you must be loving this, you must want this, right? And then also they'll see it as a rejection of themselves versus understanding that this is just, I mean, first of all, if it is a rejection of yourself, like who cares? That's not a good excuse to, you know, just do whatever you want. But even so, like not understanding that, no, this is just something that I don't want, period. I think that's always been hard for me, you know, being someone conditioned female, that like I did have sexual desires, but I also didn't, you know, like it was just always, I think that's why I fell into this trap of thinking that it was empowering and feminist to try to have these sexual experiences that I didn't want, because I had been conditioned to think that like, well, of course I don't want sex. And it was like, well, that wasn't exactly true, but at the same time it was kind of true in a lot of cases. And I thought like, yeah, I thought my empowerment was centered around like being this sexual creature who wanted to have sex all the time and was like down for things. And it really fucked with my ability to kind of explore that on my own by having all these, you know, outside imposed assumptions about what I would want because of, you know, the gender I'd been assigned at birth. And what empowerment would look like because of the gender I'd been assigned at birth. And it was really exhausting being a gatekeeper. You know, that's what so much of my dating experience through high school and even my early 20s was, you know, being like, oh, this person's kind of interesting, maybe I want to talk to them, and then being immediately in a sexualized situation where I'm like, I don't really want this to happen. I just kind of wanted to talk to this person and get to know them better. So for me, it really did kind of reinforce this idea that, like, oh, women just must not want sex ever, because I was constantly like, when sex would be brought into the situation, I would just immediately kind of freeze up and get really uncomfortable. And it just took a long time to realize, like, no, I do really enjoy it, but it has to be in just a very particular kind of scenario for me to feel that that's something that I want, and that that's okay. You know, it's not feeding into a stereotype. It's just how I am, and that's totally fine.
Right. I did think that everyone was like me. I didn't believe that sexual attraction was a real thing. I thought that was on TV only, and
all of my ace friends say that. They're like, I don't buy it.
Like, I had to ask people and confirm. Like, so you can look at a stranger and think I would have sex with that person. They're like, yeah. I'm like,
I know. It still blows my mind. It's like I can't even picture that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of which one I want to go into. So I think I think also with aromanticism, but I think particularly when we're talking about asexuality, a lot of times it gets pathologized and people try to, and a lot of the questions I got from people who are trying to figure out if this is, you know, if these are labels that they want to adopt, we're asking, like, how do I know that this is not from trauma? How do I know that this isn't just caused by a medical issue? How do I know if this is just situational? Like, maybe I just got through a horrible breakup and I'm just feeling, you know, that post breakup, like, I don't want to touch anyone else. I don't want to date anyone else. So there are a lot of questions around this idea of, like, how do I know if this is quote unquote real or caused by something else?
Well, my first instinct is always to empower people to say, if it's useful to you, then use it, no matter where it comes from. You may know that it comes from trauma. You may know that it's a medical issue. But if it's useful to you, you should still call yourself asexual. Like, I can't guarantee this, but it's possible that I'm asexual because I was raised Catholic and stuff. I don't care. I don't care.
I love that.
But it's also, I mean, a lot of Catholics are not asexual, so it's not likely that that's what happened.
They're the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I would say is, if you don't want to be asexual, if it's causing you problems and you're like feeling bad about it, you can go to like a therapist and ask them to help you with that. They might be able to. If they can't, then I think it would be worth trying to work on accepting that this might be just how you are and that that's okay. But if you don't want to work on it, it doesn't matter where it comes from. You're welcome in the community.
I love that. Daniel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I also want to make a bit of a callback, I guess, to the podcast episode that Everett was in.
Oh yeah.
Where they used the term emergence, that we have that sexuality can be an emergent property. Like, everything about us, everything is an emergent property, really. And there's no reason to think that asexuality has to be some sort of pure innate property of yours. It just has to be how you're feeling right now. If you want to use it right now, that doesn't mean you have to feel like you've always been asexual or you always will be asexual. If it's useful for you right now, like Jasper said, use it. It's meaningless to speculate about how you will feel in 10 years and try to base which labels you use on that.
Yes. Yeah, love both of your answers, and I agree. I think if something is empowering for you, if it makes you feel like something that's been clenched inside you has released, go with it, like use it. And yeah, if things change over time, then they change over time. That's okay. I mean, there's plenty of asexual people who one day suddenly are interested in sex and they want to try that out in a safe way and see if things have changed for them. And that doesn't devalue or what's the word I'm looking for? Thank you. Yes. Their asexuality before. And I think we see this a lot in the LGBTQ plus community, of this idea that that from the outside you think like, if you are a thing, then you must have always been that thing and you will always be that thing, or else it's illegitimate. But I think once you get in there, especially when you're an older queer like myself, you realize that like things can ebb and flow, and that you can be more influenced by outside sources than you would have thought. And that really can override a lot of things for you. So just like, if I was talking to someone about being gay or bisexual or queer or trans or anything else, I think making a lot of room for these labels to fluctuate and just to follow what feels good. If it feels good to call yourself asexual or aromantic, if that helps you. Like I was saying, I'm someone who really benefits from labels a lot because I find that they just empower me to do what feels right for myself. So if it feels that way to you, if you feel like now I can go out and have boundaries with people, and I can change the way that I approach, dating and life, and these conversations that come up as polite small talk, like where people are constantly asking you about who you're dating and what's going on. If having these labels help you to say, that's actually not for me, it's not something I'm interested in, and I'd rather talk about something else. If it helps you, maybe you're online dating and it helps you to list that you're asexual and that that's the kind of relationship structure you want to have, then go for it. And like Jasper said, I think, if you feel bad about what you think might be your asexuality, there's a lot of work to be done around that, because yeah, it could be a medical issue, it could be 100 things, but it's also a matter of finding the people in your life who accept you as you are and don't make you feel like you're broken, and don't make you feel like you need to be fixed, and don't make you feel like they're missing out on something because of how you are. I struggle with this a lot with like my disabilities. I, for a long time, felt like I was just a drain on other people, and that I was coming into a relationship like already kind of being a burden, and like that the other person was having to make sacrifices to be with me. And I had to do a lot of work around that to turn that around and say like, no, I'm pretty great. and that, like I bring a lot too. Like, yeah, I may not be able to do the normal standard stuff that we're shown, but there's a world of other things that can happen in a relationship, and I'm good at a lot of those things. So I just feel that way with asexuality as well. Like, it can make sense for you to feel bad about it, not because you actually feel bad about it, but because like the world is telling you that anyone who's with you is giving up something, or that you're broken, or that you're not normal. And working through that can be really empowering and self-loving. So yeah, I mean, you can look into stuff. It's okay to like maybe go get some tests done and see if something's going on, but it's also okay to just, like Jasper said, be like, this is who I am, this is where I'm at right now, and that's totally fine. I think that's really important. I wanted to spend some time debunking myths around asexuality because there are so many of them. So, Daniel, did you want to kick us off? Because I know you have a list of things that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with a few that weren't on the other list then. But one of the very common ones is that the asexual don't exist. And I know I'm a disembodied voice, but the two of you definitely exist, right?
We're here.
So I think
Daniel's
we're done
actually
with that
just
one.
a bot that we programmed. It's very sophisticated AI.
Not that sophisticated. And then there's one that assumes that you have to try having sex before you know if you're asexual, which kind of misses the point that asexuality is about attraction and not about the act itself. And that goes into some other myth busting. There's no reason that asexual people can't have sex for various reasons. Just usually not for the reason of being attracted to somebody, although if you're on the asexual spectrum, you can have specific conditions or situations where you do feel sexual attraction, of course. But even if you don't feel any, you might still do it because you have a romantic partner that you want to have that experience with, and that give them something that they need, and so on. And you might even enjoy it. Some asexual people certainly do, I've heard.
You may want to have kids.
Yeah, exactly. There are many reasons, probably more than I could think of. And there also is a debunking of the common myth that all aces are sex repulsed,
right?
And will also try to ruin everybody else's fun if possible.
Although, to be fair, when I was young, I most certainly did ruin people's fun.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot better, but when I was young, I was deeply sex repulsed, and yeah.
That's funny. Well, and I think it feeds into, I wonder, because I was not raised religious, but I really did buy into purity culture quite a bit. And I wonder if there's a kind of a connection there where, lacking any other explanation for how you feel, it's kind of easy to attach yourself to those sort of purity indoctrination, because you're like, okay, well, maybe this is what it is, right? Like, I'm just like, I had this feeling that I was just naturally more selective and, not like other girls kind of thing. And just looking back, I'm like, oh, it makes sense that appealed to me so much, because my dad definitely kind of reinforced that. But again, I wasn't like heavily indoctrinated with any of that growing up, but I think I just kind of attached to it because it fit how I felt, that I wanted to find this like one person who is very special to me. I don't experience attraction very often at all. So, even that mechanism fed really well into this idea that you're supposed to find like the one, and then that's it forever. Because I'm like, well, I only experience attraction once every 5 years. So it makes sense to me that like, this must mean something. And it also kept me in those relationships longer because, I had this idea that, there was something wrong with me where I wouldn't be able to date very often. So I would try harder to make relationships work that weren't working, to A, keep my number low, but also B, this idea of scarcity that like, oh, if this ends, then I'm going to be alone for a long time. And now I'm like,
good,
great. That's wonderful. But I was still very heavily indoctrinated with like that romantic relationships are super important. And I didn't have as great and strong friendships back then. So I would feel more alone when I didn't have a partner. But it's just interesting. It's kind of an aside, but it's just interesting looking back to see how much that kind of religious rhetoric around sex can work well for someone who's asexual, at least before they get into a relationship. And I think can kind of obscure the fact of why we feel this way, that it's not actually tied to virtue at all. It's just, that's how we are.
Yeah, that is kind of a myth too, actually, that asexual people are, elitist maybe, or feel like we're superior, which honestly, there is a strain in the community of people who feel that way. But it's right. Probably just to try to make yourselves feel better, because it kind of sucks to be treated this way. So it's nice to just be like, you know what? No, it's better that I'm this way.
Yeah.
But not everybody's like that. You don't have to be. That's not why we're asexual. It's not because we think we're better than everyone else.
Exactly. Although we do maybe have more time for activities. But it's funny that you say that, because I had that written down here in almost those exact words that you said. So you filled that quota. That's done.
Yeah. Nice.
The only other thing I think I had here was that asexuals tend to be cold and unfeeling automatons / robots.
Or autistic.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, there's definitely a stereotype that autistic people are asexual.
Yeah,
and I can say, and vice versa. And a lot of autistic people are little pervs. They have very high sex drives.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can't, some of them happen to also be asexual, but it's definitely not a one-to-one correlation at all. And I think desexualizing, autistic people, disabled people in general, is a huge issue. And again, I think it also works to kind of pathologize asexuality, because you're like, oh, you're autistic, that's why. Where it's like, no, those are actually two separate identities that I have, and they're not necessarily related to one another, right? There could be some, autistic people tend to be more queer than other people, so it's like it could be somewhat related, but it's not like it's not a medical, asexuality is not necessarily a medical thing, like, oh, my brain works this way, so I'm also asexual. It's not how it works.
Right. Often people who are able to recognize one thing about themselves that's unusual are also like, oh, maybe all these other things are true about me. And they're just more open to it. But
yeah, that's definitely been my journey for sure. Oh, I had a question, I just lost it. Well, what about dating for asexual people? I know you both are aromantic, so it's probably not as great of a question for you, but I think there's a lot of stereotypes around asexual people being these like loners who don't have any connections and don't date and have just kind of sad, empty lives. So would you like to address that myth?
Yeah, most of the asexual people that I have met want to date.
Me too.
And do date. And like most of them are not aromantic, so they still want that. It is a lot harder, to be honest. If you're interested in having sex, then it's not any harder than it is for anyone else. But, well, I guess it could be, because actually a lot of non-asexual people find it very important that their partner is sexually attracted to them. Like, they need that validation, so that can be difficult. But yeah, it's harder, honestly. But a lot of people can do it, and then you can have all of the other connections that anyone else can have that are not related to romance or sex.
Yes.
Like when I was young, I was convinced I was going to marry my sister because we got along really well, and I thought it would be great if we would just live together. Then I learned that was illegal, so that didn't happen.
Ah, shucks. The state interrupting our relationships yet again.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you consider asexual people part of the queer or LGBTQ community. That's a big question that comes up a lot as well, I think.
I do. They don't always consider us to be part of it, but I do.
Yeah, I certainly do as well. I know that there are asexual people who don't feel like they're part of the queer community, but it seems like most do. Even though, like you say, Jasper, it's not always the other way around.
Yeah.
But I mean, it makes sense to me that if if you're attracted to the opposite gender, you're not part of the queer community. If you're exclusively, right? But if you're attracted to the same gender or multiple genders, then you are, and no gender should be equally differentiated from heterosexuality as all the genders, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
It makes sense to me anyway.
Yeah, and I honestly feel like anything that is challenging, like the cishet patriarchy, is part of the community. That's how I feel. I know not everyone agrees with that, but I think, asexuality is one of those things that it challenges this idea that we have of how people are supposed to, what desires people are supposed to have, and how they're supposed to meet those needs. And I think, yeah, anytime you have someone stepping away from that, I mean, just the struggle that asexual people can have in their lives and the amount of sexual trauma I think a lot of ace people have from this, to me, automatically makes them part of, or makes us part of the community. And that's how I feel about it.
And
And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that also you basically have to come out to as asexual
Yeah.
if you want anyone to understand it. You don't, if you come out as heterosexual, nobody reacts very much. But if you come out as asexual, you get a lot of strange reactions and weird questions, just like if you come out as gay or trans or anything else in the queer community.
Yep.
Yeah. It can be very hard to participate in the queer community as an asexual person because it is so deeply sexualized. So we're not always welcome or comfortable there, but we should be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I have struggled with, and I think I've talked about or mentioned in the past, is like realizing that I was queer in the last few years and then trying to find some kind of community, especially locally. Like I feel I have really good community online, but like when I go out and meet space with my body, it's like
Bars,
I actually
clubs.
yeah, and even I'm really lucky to live right next to an LGBTQ center. Yeah, which is amazing. It's such a cool place.
Yeah.
But, I went to a meeting there to try to meet some people and like got invited out afterwards. And then we went to, and even how people are talking, like the person I ended up clicking with is extremely sexual. So like, that's all she was talking about was like sleeping with women and like, all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, it's like, yeah, but also, I don't know, I'm just kind of like nervous about the whole thing. And of course we ended up going to the like lesbian bar down the street. And I mean, people are like literally having sex in front of us at the bar. And I was just like, and there was like a wet t-shirt contest and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I just want to sit around and like talk about queer theory, like I just want to, or like talk about board games or something. I just want to have like queer friends and not have this relationship be rooted in sex. But it's so hard to find, just a casual space you can go into that isn't kind of oriented around people hooking up. And then I feel like so jumpy. And then that was part of me not knowing if I was actually queer or not, because I would get so uncomfortable in these spaces. And I was like, oh my God, is this homophobia? Is this, me actually being straight? But, then I came to realize like, no, it's just that isn't how I want to approach a space. I don't want to approach it from a sexual, like a primarily sexual lens. I want that to be like the last thing that happens, if at all.
Yeah, I found it very hard to be at Pride. I've gotten a lot better about being sex repulsed, and I've learned a lot about it, and I'm not as uncomfortable, and you can't really embarrass me anymore. But before that, I didn't want to go to Pride and stuff because everybody's going around half naked and wearing like, fetish gear and stuff and grinding on each other. And I couldn't even be around that. It was so uncomfortable. So like, that's not very welcoming to asexual people, and don't feel very proud when I'm there.
Yeah, I'm okay seeing stuff for the most part, but I don't like when I walk around, I always have this feeling like, is someone going to grab me? Or, I mean, some people will like just go up and like kiss someone else or just grab other people. And I always feel a bit on edge whenever I'm at Pride, just not knowing if I'm going to get like handled by someone out of nowhere, feel very uncomfortable. And then same thing, like worry that if I'm like, oh no, don't do that, like that someone's going to interpret that as like a rejection of them or like homophobia or something, where it's like, no, I don't like being grabbed like that out of nowhere. Or sometimes at all.
We haven't really gone into it in detail yet with the different sex repulsed and favorable and the different labels like that. But I would say I'm sexy different. So I've been to a number of prides, including Amsterdam a couple of times, which are pretty big, and it's been all right. It's not been terribly uncomfortable. I think it helps me personally that I apparently give off piss off vibes. So it's very unlikely to be grabbed by anybody. But I can definitely see how that would be uncomfortable, and I instead tend to get very bored with that kind of stuff, especially when it comes to media. When there's a lot of sex stuff in books, I just skip some pages, or in movies I skip forward and skip all of those scenes because it's just so boring.
Yeah, I tend to tune out during sex scenes. I'm like, okay, all right.
Here we go.
Why are they in there? I don't know.
I can enjoy that kind of stuff, but I am also like, it has been annoying me lately that I feel like every TV show now has to have like graphic sex scenes, and I often like, especially when it just doesn't even make sense to what the show's about. It just seems like this thing that's considered normal place now, and I think a lot about actors and how that must be really hard as an actor if you like don't want to do sex scenes, or especially explicit sex scenes. Like, it seems like you can't get work nowadays on anything interesting that's not just going to have like these really explicit sex scenes in it. It's like a weird thing but I think about it all the time. I'm like, what if you're asexual and you want to be an actor? I don't acting is a whole thing I could talk about, because I just feel like it's such a like bad place of consent, but it's this thing that's seen as like normal for you to have to do stuff you don't want to do, and that's your job, and that you shouldn't have any say in that. And I just think that is so toxic and dangerous. But yeah, I think about that a lot. Like, I wonder how many people are left out of some creative avenues just because they don't want to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's weird how common it's become now, because it used to be like, oh, we'd show all the violence, that's fine, but oh, no one can take their shirt off. But now everyone can do everything, and it's like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of it's just very explicit. I'm always like, damn, you guys are naked together and like touching, and like I just think about how I just would not be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to like act, like this was happening and that it was pleasurable. It would be so awkward to me.
Yeah, it's like you must actually be having sex, because like, I don't see how you could be that close and not having sex.
Exactly, like you basically are having sex. And it's weird because like I watch some queer stuff, and for me that's kind of empowering to see that sort of explicit sex scenes. But it's the same thing too. It's like, what if you don't want to do that and you're an actor? It's like, then you just can't get any of these jobs because they're all so sexual. I see about that because Abigail from Philosophy Tube talked about that in her sex work video, because she's like, I'm an actor, and like I've had to kiss people that I didn't want to, and like have honestly had some experiences that were a little traumatizing. And I was like, I feel like you shouldn't have to, I feel like you should be able to say no to that stuff. So I think we talked about a lot of the myths around asexuality. I feel like we're probably missing some. Maybe they'll come up. I did have one last question from other people about dating or finding a partner, and we were kind of laughing before we went on air about how like, I don't know that we have any great advice, but I thought it would be a good thing to bring up because I know a lot of people do ask about it. So the person specifically who asked, just generally, it's kind of hard to find someone to date if you're asexual. And then they were saying that, because usually the answer is to go online dating. Nowadays there might even be filters that you can check off. But they're saying that, the nature of online dating is that it's pretty superficial. It's kind of driven by pictures and a lot of stuff that asexual people don't really care about. So it can be hard to even find someone that seems interesting enough that you'd want to talk to them. And then most people also seem pretty unwilling to have a platonic conversation online. So I just wanted to highlight that that's kind of the reality of the situation. I always found online dating to be very difficult and frustrating. I think both as an autistic person and also someone who's demisexual, I had so many dates that were fine. And the person, I would say, like, I think you're cool and I would like to get to know you more in this like in a situation where we're not having to decide if we're going to be a couple. And they always just were like, no, I need to know right now, like, if you're attracted to me or not. And it was always so hard for me and so much pressure, because I'm like, I just don't work that way. Like, I'm not going to feel attracted to you right away, but you were like fun to hang out with and you were fun to talk to. And I just kind of want to do more of that for a while before I have to make a decision. So I don't really have like online dating horror stories. Like, I didn't really have, I have one story that's kind of funny, but I didn't have any bad experiences. But it was just that pressure all the time to me was a very bad experience in and of itself, even though the people I went on dates with were mostly really great people that I had pleasant times with. So do you two have any advice, or do you want to just kind of talk to this topic of finding a partner?
Well, I can go ahead. So I have never actually dated. My relationships evolved from friendships, just sort of naturally, like I said. And I don't know how I would date, because dating sounds terrible, especially online dating. Like, it just sounds awful. And I guess the only advice that I can give is advice that I would give anybody who's trying to date, which is know what you want and be honest and upfront about what you want, and just like tell them right away so that they don't expect anything different from you. And second, try to learn how to be happy single, and having lots of other connections like friends and stuff, and not so that you don't require dating to work out for you.
I like that.
Yeah, and it's similar for me. I haven't really dated either. I was in a couple of date-like situations, I guess, with somebody many years ago, but we had already been we met in an IRC chat. That's how old I am. And we had been
amongst my people.
we've been talking on there for well over a year before we even met. So that's my experience with that is basically mostly text, really. And then we met a number of times, but I feel like all the good parts were in text, if you ask me.
Yeah. And I feel like similar to me, I have almost exclusively dated people that I was friends with first. Might be people that I worked with, which is not always an ideal situation, but it is a place where you're around someone a lot without that pressure being there. So you get to know somebody, and, just friends of friends. And I think if you're able, I know it's hard now with COVID, but if you're able to join different social groups or activist groups, or just something where you're kind of bonded around some shared interests, that can help a lot. I do think that online dating, for a lot of reasons, is just really difficult. And I think it is particularly difficult for asexual people. And I would even say aromantic, if you happen to be an aromantic person who's trying to find a partner, that can be really hard too, because there's a lot of expectations. Like, I know some people who are asexual, but like highly romantic. So just even like finding another asexual person doesn't mean you're going to be on the same page of what your relationship looks like, or what either one of you want from it. You might find someone who, yeah, doesn't want to have sex, but does want to kiss a lot and cuddle a lot and have like romantic overtures all the time. And that might be stuff that you just like are not into at all. I know that's been a problem for me, is like, I'm not into kind of the romantic gestures and sort of the more squishy stuff. And that has been an issue in my relationships. So yeah, I like what Jasper said. I think just knowing yourself really well, putting yourself out there very clearly, not putting up with other people's shit. Like, if you have been clear about what you do and don't want, and someone's trying to push stuff on you, that's not a safe person. And that doesn't mean that you're broken. It means that they're not being a safe person, and you can walk away from that, and don't let that make you feel bad. Because, it is hard to find, I don't want to say there's someone for everyone, because I don't know if that's true.
Yep.
But I do know that I know a lot of people who have very particular needs or very particular identities who have found people to be really happy with. So I know it's possible. And that, the key to that is not devaluing yourself in the relationship just because you have something that society says is an obscurity or, a sacrifice or whatever it is. So I think the getting comfortable being alone and having like a really nice, rich, full life outside of a romantic relationship are really key parts to that. And honestly, for everyone,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know, cishet, what's the word for it? Is it allosexual? I always forget. Allosexual people who like haven't done that work and are constantly in these like horrible relationships or having their hearts broken because they're putting up with shit that they shouldn't. And so, maybe that can help you feel more normal too, that like the biggest work you need to do is the work that everyone needs to do. It's really no different for us. And I will say, like, I used to think, I'm embarrassed to admit this now, but I'm going to admit it publicly. I had a coworker whose sister-in-law didn't meet her husband until she was in her 40s. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, if I haven't met my person by the time I'm in my 40s, forget it, and now I'm going to turn 40 this year and I'm happily single, and my perspective on things has changed a lot. So just give yourself space too, that like, I don't want to say it's a maturity thing, but I just think as you have more life experiences, as you make these better relationships, like your view and importance on certain things does shift. And I do think, I'm just saying this because if you're someone who like the idea of being happy alone and kind of like releasing the importance of a romantic relationship sounds horrible and unimaginable to you, just give yourself space that like over time that can change. How you feel today is not necessarily how you'll feel in a year or 10 years or whatever. I cannot believe how incredibly happy alone I am. And it actually makes things difficult when I talk to other people, because then I'll have other people ask like, oh, are you dating anyone? And I'm just kind of like it takes a minute to even compute like what they're asking me. I just had this, I went out, saw my best friend on vacation, and her mom came out to dinner, and I love her mom. But that was one of the first things she asked me, and she's like, do you have a boyfriend? And I was like, I was just kind of like, wait, what?
Could that possibly apply to me?
Yeah, I was like, and yeah, so it can be hard when you have the rest of the world, like that's considered small talk, that's considered a normal rite of passage and a thing to talk about, but that's on them, like just be a person who has other things to talk about and feels pretty good by themselves. And also give yourself space for pity parties. That's okay too. I give myself time to be full of self-pity, and then I move on. But yeah, just like I just want to say, like, it is possible. It is possible to have a life where you're completely satisfied and really, really happy by yourself. And it is also possible to find love and find someone who will love you how you are and because of how you are, not in spite of it.
I want to mention that there's also something called queer platonic relationships.
Yes.
Where you might have some aspects of a romantic relationships, but not others. Maybe you cuddle and you live together, but you don't have other expectations on each other that come with romantic relationships. That's also an option. Of course, it's probably tricky to find a queer platonic partner. I haven't tried, but probably. But if you do, I mean,
think,
that's if you can negotiate that with somebody,
yeah,
that could be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, because I don't know, it seems pretty common in the spaces that I'm in that people have these just non-traditional friendships all around, where they have different connections and different needs met, in a way that works for everybody. And I think that's a great suggestion, Daniel, is that just, and I think this is part of why it's important for asexual people to be included in queerness, because this is a great avenue for people to find all of the support and, you know, kind of emotional needs that they need met without having to deal with the cishets out in the world.
Yeah. And I think what you'll find is that a lot of people who would never have considered that before would actually be open to it if you just explained what exactly you're thinking.
Absolutely.
Like, people aren't naturally cissexual, heterosexual. They're not naturally gonna go for this nuclear family thing. That's something that we're taught. So a lot of people would be happy to try something different. They just might not know it exists. So if you just explain what you're thinking, like, who knows, they could be up for it.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not to be an opportunist, but I think people, you know, we just have still in and have gone through a year and a half of lockdown. I think people are really way more open to different living situations than they were before, because they've realized what it's like to be alone for a really long time. And also just the idea of wanting support that doesn't just come from one particular place, but like the importance of community support. So I think, you know, now more than ever, you probably would find people really open to this idea. I feel like people also have been talking more and more about communes and, you know, just all these things that we run to feel like we can escape capitalism. And, you know, in that, like, a commune is challenging the nuclear family structure. It's people saying we want to be around each other in a way where we support one another and we have that family vibe with multiple families included in that and people included in that. So I think it's possible. I think anything is possible. Just like Jasper said, you have to know what you want and just communicate it, and then hopefully find some people who are down to try that out with you. Just from doing the work that I've done online and having my friends consume that, I feel like I've shifted my relationships with people to be a bit more queer and be a bit more non-traditional family structured, because they heard me talk about it in a really open and vulnerable way about what I want and what I, you know, value. And they love me, so they made space for that. And it's been really helpful. But it was something that I didn't think I could directly ask them for, and it turns out I could have.
And for those watching and listening who are not asexual or allosexual, there's in this country there's a relationship type that we call särbo, which means living apart. That's becoming more and more popular, where people have romantic relationships, but they have no intention of living together. So they have their own separate lives, but they still have a romantic relationship when they feel like it's when it suits them, I guess.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say, like, I guess my last point on dating would be that the most interesting people are the ones who are totally happy with themselves and who are happy on their own, who have full lives, who are doing things, who have goals. They don't require anything. Like, they're the most interesting people, and you're going to attract more people if you're like that. So I would encourage people to go that direction.
Yeah, I think people have a mistaken idea about being happy on your own means like being isolated. And it's the opposite. Yeah. It's like the more connected to community and to other people and to your interests you are, the more you'll be okay being romantically alone, but you'll be less alone in general. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing if you can achieve it.
Though it's cool to be a hermit sometimes too, honestly.
I mean, I love being a hermit, but I always try to remember, I'm like, Nick, not everyone loves being alone all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what other advice would other people give? But yeah, I think, you know, a lot of us aren't used to having our needs met. And I think that is work to do. Can you meet your own needs? Can you find people who can help you meet needs that you can't meet by yourself? I think it's just, that is the deep work, really, that it's at the heart of all of this, is how to get your needs met in a healthy way and not be acting out of trauma and not be, you know, seeking things out of trauma. And it's hard work and it takes a long time, but if you can get through it, you'll be so much happier and calmer. And like Jasper said, you'll just have a much more full life in general. We did have one last question that I thought was kind of funny because it's such an aromantic question. Am I aromantic if I fall in love with all my best friends, but like maybe in a platonic way? I'm so confused. What do you two think?
Well, that has been my experience. That's how I got into relationships.
Yeah.
I guess if you feel like that is aromantic, then yeah, it is. Like, sure, of course. For me, I don't consider this is, I don't know, this is just how I think about like my feelings towards friends versus romantic feelings. It's not a different type of feeling. It's just a different quantity of feeling. So like if I really, really like someone, no, I probably would be willing to like commit to them. I probably would like to live with them. I probably would like to stay with them for a really long time. Like I would like to have all that intimacy and stuff. So it's not really a different type of feeling. It's just a lot of feeling. So I fall in love with my best friends, which is, you know, it can be awkward if they don't feel the same way, but if they do, then we just get together and that's cool.
Yeah.
I've never really managed to figure out what in love means, if I'm honest. I love a number of people, but the qualifier in love, which is it's a very I think American way to put that, is something that I'm not sure what that is. So I don't know what
That's
it means
fair.
in this context.
Yeah.
Or anything, but I know that there's a term for a platonic crush, which is a squish. Which I really like that name.
That is great. Yeah, I think, like we've said today, if aromantic feels right, then use that. But I think it's pretty common to like fall in love with your best friends. I think especially on the ace spectrum. I don't know so much about the aromantic, or I should say asexual spectrum. I think especially if you're kind of on the demisexual end, but I have a lot of friends who are queer, and I think part of it is just that you're not going to be best friends with someone you don't think is really fucking cool. And then, you know, then we're taught that certain feelings are only supposed to be for romantic relationships. But I think it's natural for us to feel a spectrum of feelings for these people that we're around a lot, that we talk to a lot, and that we think are really fucking cool. And if you qualify that as being in love, then that's fine. If you qualify it as something else, like I've been really trying to figure out how to phrase it for myself. And I've been saying lately that I feel like I have romantic feelings towards my friends that is not sexual in any way. But I don't know if that's accurate. It's just kind of what has worked so far, because stuff that I identified as romantic, like I want to cook them food. I want to, you know, have sleepovers and like play board games and like wake up in the morning together and like talk over coffee. You know, that stuff I used to qualify as romantic probably isn't, but that's just kind of what works for me right now, to try to identify the shift I've had in how I look at my friends and the feelings I have towards them, how much deeper they've gotten as they've gotten older and become more queer and become more comfortable with being demisexual and like having more of my needs met by a wider range of people.
Yeah, I think that because for a lot of people, the line between romantic and non-romantic is, do I want to sleep with this person?
Exactly.
When you get rid of that question, then you can do whatever you want.
You're kind of like, oh. Yeah, like maybe I have crushes on all my friends.
Yeah, why not?
And why wouldn't you? They're great, right?
Yeah.
They're the people you choose to be around. Cool. Well, I think we answered all the questions we had gotten from the audience. I did want to point out, Jess made a comment earlier that I meant to pull up, but said a lot of queer community is sex and bar focused. And as a sober ace, I also find it very difficult sometimes to find community I fit in with.
I had written that in my notes. I was like, yeah, it must be really hard for sober people too. That's not cool.
Yeah. And I definitely, because I feel that as well. I do drink, but not a lot. And I don't always, I'm often searching for things that can happen during the day. Because with my chronic illness, I don't like staying out or being out very late. and stuff that isn't oriented around alcohol, and it's like very hard to find.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah. Very hard to find.
Yeah.
then,
when I lived in San Diego, I started an asexuality meetup group. One person came, and she was very anti-relationships, and I was in a relationship at the time, so we didn't have a lot to talk about. It didn't work out that well. So yeah,
it's unfortunate.
That's my only real experience trying to create community without alcohol.
That's also like a very San Diego experience, I feel, from living here. It's like there's like one type of queerness here, and if you don't fit into it, it's pretty hard to find your people.
Yeah.
I have one thing that I considered that we might want to get into. I don't think we got into this at all. I hesitate to bring this up because it's so annoying. But usually when you come out as ace, you get questions about masturbation.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason that I've not been able to figure out, because I don't think that happens when other queer people come out. Does it? Usually?
I don't think so. Usually you do get asked about who you've had sex with, but I don't think anyone ever asks you about masturbating.
I think it's an attempt maybe to invalidate. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But
it definitely is, because people have they mistake like a sex drive or the ability to orgasm with attraction. Right. Like they don't understand that they're totally different things. So they think, oh, if you masturbate, then like you must have these mechanisms that mean that you're not asexual, but it's not true. A lot of asexual people masturbate, and it's totally fine.
Yeah, it's just like a sex thing, not related to attraction, really.
Yeah, like I don't have a sex drive, but like there are plenty of reasons. Like, I guess that maybe masturbation might maybe they're asking because they're like curious, like, oh, how they have asked like, what would you think about? Like, what would you fantasize about? And maybe you fantasize about stuff, or maybe you think about other people instead of yourself, or maybe you don't think about anything at all, or whatever. Some people think of it as a chore. They're like, oh, I gotta get this done so I can focus.
That's
and then some people just don't do it at all. It's like not really inherent to asexuality.
No, it's not. And again, it's a funny thing because it's not like, when you're heterosexual, people don't really ask you about that. It's just this thing where it's
they
like,
just kind of assume,
oh, you're different, so let me interrogate you about your like intimate practices. It's like, can you not?
It's a bit invasive.
Yeah,
it is very invasive. Well, and I think it goes to as well people thinking like, oh, if you ever had an orgasm, then you wouldn't be asexual because they're so amazing. So I think that's part of I think that can be part of the question for people, is like, it kind of goes back to that, like, well, you haven't tried it, so you can't actually say that you're not.
Right.
So yeah, I think people are like, oh, well, if you've masturbated and you've had an orgasm, then like, how could you not think that was the most amazing thing in the world? And it's like, well, maybe I do, and that's why I masturbate. Right?
Yeah,
that's
solo is totally separate from joining other people.
Completely different. Completely different. Neuropane had said earlier, to me, being ace just means you don't want to have sex. Everything else is highly individual. And then said, by one, of course, I mean something deeper than like wanting a sandwich. I mean a desire drive.
Interesting.
I thought that was an interesting
the one asexual person that I dated wanted to have sex.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Damn.
They just didn't have sexual attraction, but they still were interested in sex. And I was like,
oh, yeah. And you were like,
thanks.
Shucks.
Yeah, I think even that can be very individual.
Yeah.
I like some people
they're checking,
even might.
Like, does this disqualify me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
it doesn't.
I like this
don't
comment.
worry, it doesn't.
It just said, I think some people ask because they masturbate, but also think they might be on the ace spectrum with the little eye-looking emoji.
Yeah.
And said they're looking for their own validation. I think absolutely.
And then I guess I shouldn't be annoyed
in
those cases.
I know it's so hard to know because I do get so annoyed by some things, but then realize that like I also ask those things because I was in the beginning phases of being like, this could be me. I don't know. So it's not always coming from a bad, like an invalidating place. Sometimes it's someone is genuinely curious.
Right.
Yeah, it's like being vegan. Someone's like, where do you get your protein? It's like,
And you're
are you
like,
trying to invalidate me, or are you trying to figure out how you can be vegan safely?
Exactly. Exactly. And depending on my mood is how I will answer. Neuropain said anyone who thinks an orgasm would alter someone's sexuality must have lived a pretty boring life.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, I think we did it. I think we did the thing.
All right.
Yeah. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you, Daniel and Jasper, for joining me today. I couldn't have done it without you. It was so nice to have. I mean, look there's 3 of us in one place. This is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
It's been fun.
Never happens. And then I want to say thanks to everyone who joined the stream today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for future notifications. And I'm not sure what the next stream is going to be, but it'll be in the next few weeks. So keep your peepers peeled for that. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.